Anyway, as we get into the teaching today, I want to orient you to a couple things in your bulletin because you're going to need two of the things that are stuffed in here. First thing, we'll start with the pink sheet. So on one side it says, "Love does, be not afraid." That's the theme I'm talking about today. Most of the stuff on there is stuff that you're going to do later this week if you want to. But on the flip side of that, this thing on the top, it says Crosswalk Adventures. I have a task for you as crosswalkers. Membership or not, that doesn't matter to me at this point. I want to know what you think God might be able to do with us. We do a lot of amazing things at Crosswalk. I'm really proud of our church and the amount of reach we have in the community, the number of people we touch and support. It's really awesome. Very proud of that. But I just wonder, if God really showed up and in even greater ways, just how much could God do here? So I'm wondering if there are any dreams that might be bubbling in our midst to think, wow, I think it would be so cool if we could do that. And if God were behind that, we could probably do that. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And this page kind of gives you an overview just to remind you who we are, what we're capable of, who our reach is, what it means to be us, and in brevity. So anyway, I'm going to be asking for that in an official way in 2 weeks. And the reason it's important right now is because our Board of Stewards are meeting in about a month to talk about the dreams of the church and what are some of the big goals that we really think God is with us on. And we want your input, so this helps us be better leaders when we get together for that. So be thinking about that. The thing you're going to need today, which I'll get to in a while, you don't have to deal with it right now. It's another insert. It has a little compass rose on there and it says, "Where are you going?" I'm going to give you time to do this later on in the teaching, and take it seriously. I already scribbled my stuff, and you'll have time to do it, so you don't even have to think about it now, but just have that ready. Okay. Yeah, if you need a copy, raise your hand. We'll get those passed out during the video. Okay, without further ado, I am in the Love Does series. This is week number 4, and in just a moment we'll have the video pop on for us. If you're new to Crosswalk, we're in the middle of this series called Love Does, based on a book by a guy named Bob Goff, who's just, you'll see, pretty remarkable character. And we've been journeying through at the same time, sort of unexpectedly, the story of Jacob, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about today. So without any more, let's check out the video, and I'll be with you in about 9 minutes.
Hey, I'm down by the water here, and it's actually one of my favorite places to be. When Jesus spent time with his friends, he spent a lot of it by the water, didn't he? I think it's because our minds are a little clearer. We can think about things, and the pace just slows down. The cadence of our life can slow down a little bit, so we can learn some lessons that just sometimes just get swallowed up by all the activity of the day, huh? We give our kids allowance at our place, and not much of it. And one of my sons, Adam, had saved up a bunch of allowance, and he told me one day that he was going to buy a sailboat. Like, what do you want? Like, you could probably get one that's 3 feet long for how much he had. And he got on Craigslist, and he gave me a call and said, "Hey, I found this boat. It's got 4 beds in it and a kitchen." I'm like, oh my gosh, what creeper's selling you that? So I did the dad thing, because, I wanted to go down, make it a big teachable moment. I'd go down, and I knew how it was going to play out. He'd get down to the docks, and there'd be some guy, and he'd say, like, I don't have the pink slip, but my friend has the pink slip, and he's living out of the country raising llamas or something. I had it all figured out in my head. And this guy shows up. He's a scientist from Scripps Institute. And he's like a really high-functioning guy. And he starts talking about this boat as we're walking towards it. And he tells me what he does for a living. He is working on a cure for cancer. And we walk up to this boat, and it's 20 or 30 years old, so it's been rode hard and put away wet. You can tell this boat's been worked a little bit. But the way this guy described this boat and all the adventures he'd gone on it, and he said that wanted to ease up on it, but I said, is the price that you said legit? And he said, yeah, I just wanted to give it to somebody, a guy like your son, who'd taken on more adventures. And when this guy was telling about all the adventures he'd gone on this boat, I started to understand it, how a guy like that could wish for somebody else to just take the adventures he'd gone on and just go on more adventures like that. It sounded a lot like Jesus, honestly. It sounded like somebody who knew what it was like to live a really, really full life and then to give that to somebody else and say, go live a really, really full life, one that's just chock full of adventures. And one of the things that I noticed too is that Adam didn't see this boat the way that everybody else might have. Like, he didn't see a 20 or 30-year-old boat with fiberglass that was a little dull and wood that had a couple chunks missing. He put these sails up, and you guys, it looked like some old laundry. Just these sails that had been just worked. Adam didn't see it this way, though. He didn't see his life the way that a lot of people see their lives. He saw a life that was full of adventure. He was just itching in anticipation for getting this boat. So he gave the small bag of money that he had to this guy, and the guy signed the pink slip. Well, Adam said, well, when should we, take it back to, here, which is where we were going. And we were pretty far north, and we involved going out in the ocean. And I said, well, let's go now. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a chart. We just went. And I think that some of my favorite times have been spent out on the water sailing. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, some buddies started talking about doing a sailboat trip, and we decided we were going to sail a boat just a little bit longer than Adam's, 36 feet long, to Hawaii. And I don't know if you know much about boats, but 36-foot boat is kind of having like 2 Camrys parked end to end. And we filled it with 36 bags of sails. There's spinnakers and mainsails, all the ones in case something rips. And then we put 20 cases of stag chili in it. Now, I don't know why we didn't mix it up a little bit and get a can of pears, but we just filled it up with all these cases of chili, which is really a big problem. We set out for this thing. It's called a Transpac race. Isn't that terrific? The way the Transpac race works is this. You have to steer by the stars the whole way. So we got to the starting line of this race, and the only thing that was different than what we planned is that I had gotten a hold of this guy who was a navigator for a destroyer, and he was going to be the guy steering for the stars, right? And 3 days before the race, they changed his orders because the Navy's that way. And so he couldn't go. So we said we need a navigator, and they picked me. I don't even know the pointy end from the blunt end. So I go down to West Marine and I say, can I get a map? And they say, it's a chart. I'm like, okay, sorry. Can I have a chart? And I'm not much about, I'm not much of a sailor, but I knew that, the West Coast was over here on one side of the chart, and on the other side, there's these little islands. It says Hawaii on it, and there's 2,600 miles of nothing in between. So I just said, well, let's go do this thing. So I got a yardstick, and I put one end on Long Beach and the other end on Diamond Head, and I drew a line, right? How tough could it be? Just follow the line. So we set out on the race, and we're 900 miles off the coast of California, and I'm steering along the line, right? Because there's this compass rose in the upper right-hand corner of this chart that, tells you the heading. Did you guys know there's a difference between true and magnetic north? There is. And from, here to the street, it's about 1/4 of an inch. But from here to Hawaii, you miss the entire chain. I'm not kidding. So we're 1,000 miles off the coast before I figure out that we're going to miss Hawaii. Like our first landfall, they'll be handing me an egg roll. So we get to Hawaii, and reflecting back on this trip and all this time on the water and what I'd learned, I was thinking about how there's a big difference between true and magnetic in our own lives too, right? The stuff that's true and the stuff that's magnetic, the stuff that lures me away, the things that lure me away from living this big adventure that God has for me, sometimes really boils down to just being afraid. right? I'm afraid that if I live that big adventure, that life that I've always been itching for, but I've never really taken the next step towards, like, what if I do it and I fail? Well, you know what? I think that's why God, throughout the scriptures, keeps saying the same message to his friends. And it comes in 3 words: be not afraid, right? He says that to Joshua. He says, you're taking over for Moses. And Joshua says, I'm not the guy. And he says, be not afraid. He says the same thing to Jeremiah, right? You're the new guy. And he says, I can't even get a sentence right. And he says, be not afraid. He says it to Abraham before this big battle. He says, I'm your shield and your great reward. Be not afraid. And Jesus said it to 3 of his friends out in a place like this, rowing a boat. And he said, it is I. Be not afraid. I think we're just get afraid. And then I go with Adam, who's not afraid of anything. And I feel like I've got a little bit more of a camera angle on who Jesus is. He doesn't want us just putting our toe in the water. He wants us doing a cannonball. You know what a cannonball is, right? You grab your knees and you go. I'd show you one, but I wouldn't be able to finish this video. You grab your knees and you go. So Adam and I are sailing this boat in the direction that we want to go. And let me give you a little navigation tip. The way you can figure out where you are is this idea called dead reckoning. In dead reckoning, you do this. You take a couple fixed points that you have. You could take a lighthouse and draw a line from the lighthouse to you. You could take a mountaintop, if you know where that is, and draw a line from the mountaintop to you. And where those lines cross, well, guess what? That's where you are. I think about that a lot in our faith. As we're moving in this direction towards Jesus, take some fixed points, find Scripture, draw a line from Scripture to you. What does that mean to me? Not only what is it supposed to mean, or what do they tell you it means, what does it really, really mean to me? And draw a line from Scripture to you. Take this group of people who are wise, people who know God, people who point you in the direction of Jesus, and draw a line from them to you too. And where they intersect your life, you know what? You found yourself. And then just say, so where do we go from here? Let me give you another tip about navigation. Let me tell you how to not collide with stuff. When you're out in the ocean, sailing back from Hawaii, you don't see anything. There's barely stars out there. And so if you see a light, the shortest distance between Hawaii and the U.S., it's called the Great Circle Course. And this Great Circle Course is the lane that all the freighters take to get back and forth from the west coast of Hawaii. So when you're sailing along and you're in the Great Circle Course, the one thing you don't want to do is get hit by a ship, right? And the only way you can tell they're out there is you'll see a little light on the horizon. What you do is you pick a fixed point. And when you pick that fixed point, you see how that lines up with the lights of the ship. And check it every little bit and see if the light of the ship is moving ahead of the fixed point on the boat, then you know it's going to pass in front of you. And if the light is moving behind, you know you're going to pass in front of that. Just keep you from colliding. So actually, we were coming back from Hawaii and we hadn't seen any boats in, 6 or 8 days. And then one of the lights of a ship showed up. And we're in the Great Circle Course, so I knew I didn't want to have them find the mast of our sailboat, hanging from the anchor when they pulled into port. So I turn on all the lights on the boat. And I get on the radio and I call out and I say, hey, ship on the horizon. And I gave the name of our boat and I said, hey, we're over here at 1 o'clock. I don't know how far away we are, but I see you. Do you see us? And listen, there's nothing. So I turn on more lights on the boat and I call about 15 minutes later. I line up on this stanchion, this fixed point. I see we're the light's not moving. We're on a collision course. I call again, ship on the horizon. We're here. Do you see us? Nothing. And I check about 15 minutes later, still it's not moving ahead or behind. We're on a collision course. So I'm not panicked, but I'm down below and there's a couple people up above and I'm making another radio call and I start hearing all this laughter. And I go upstairs, man, we're on this collision course with this freighter. Nobody should be laughing. I go upstairs to tell these guys, you guys, this is serious stuff. And I realized, you know what? This light from the ship, it was actually the moon rising through the clouds. I felt like such a goofball. They were all credibility was lost. They would have made me walk the plank if we had one. sometimes we think we're going to collide with stuff. We just get afraid. And again, that's where Jesus just says, be not afraid. Like some of this stuff that in your life you think, if I just really go on this adventure, I'm just not going to get there, or I'm going to crash and burn along the way. And heaven's just saying, no, you won't. You're a child of God. So Adam and I round the point and we pull up to the dock here and tie up the boat. But one of the beautiful things about Adam is he didn't leave that boat tied up for long. And I think God asked that of us. We start out on these adventures, but somehow we end up tying them up at the dock. And I think Jesus is just saying, could we untie again? Could we get back to building that rocket ship that was supposed to be your life? And I know it's a harbor and everything. The boat looks terrific at the dock, but man, we were made to do adventures. So we got this boat back to the dock, and we were talking about names for it, and I had a whole long list of names that would be really cool for the boat. You know what Adam said? I want to name the boat The Story. Isn't that beautiful? And it was more than just his story that he was talking about. He was talking about the guy's story that intersected with his, this scientist that had done these terrific adventures on the boat, and he wanted Adam to do the same thing. It would be part of something bigger. And so one of the things that Adam did is he untied that boat a lot. He went on the terrific adventures with it. He was always out on the boat. One time I called up and said, where'd you go today? He said, Mexico. How cool is that? Who sails across? Mexico's like 9 yards that way because we're so close to it in San Diego. But there's something beautiful that happens when you're living out this adventure, living out this story. And you know what made it work is that Adam untied the boat a lot. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to just untie our boats and say, what are you holding on to? What are you afraid is going to happen? Go live that big life. Get back to building that rocket ship that was your life. And there's something cool about having a fort too. Having a thing that takes you somewhere, right? For Adam, it was the sailboat. But you guys would get an old like refrigerator box where there's something beautiful. Remember when you were a kid, you'd get this box and you'd go in it and you'd put all your favorite stuff in it. Like, go do that. Figure out who were you made to be and what's the next step for you. And you know what one of the next steps might be? To get out of the box. To just say like, I'm going to go untie this thing and see what happens. One of the last things that I think about when I picture story is Adam deciding he's going to leave for college and saying, you know what, I'm going to sell this boat to somebody else. You know what he sold it for? What he got it for. And I saw a guy get in this boat and start sailing away from the dock. And I started thinking to myself, I wonder what story he's going to live with his life. When you guys start living this story, when I start living this story without fear, without like being tied up to the dock anymore, we not only intersect our own idea of like what God has for us, but we start impacting other people's story. So here's the question I have for you. What's your story? And what are you going to do next with it?
Cool stuff. So, hey, all right. I'm going to touch on some of these things in a moment, but before I forget, for youth who are going on the Rosie the Riveter tour, right after service at 11:30ish, well, we're going to get out of here before that, but 11:30ish we'll have lunch over in the youth room. Got pizza coming in for that, and then we'll head out probably noonish or so. So look forward to that. Okay, so these are some verses that I think are very potent. Both of these are actually from Jesus in the book of John. The first one, he's talking about his purpose in the world versus other options. And he says, my purpose is to give people a rich and satisfying life. He did talk about there's another voice in the world, and you can picture that in a variety of ways, but he said that one, you know, is to steal and to destroy. But my purpose is to bring you life. And not just any kind of life, but a rich and satisfying life. He's not talking about personal wealth here. He's just talking about a meaningful, rewarding life. That's what Jesus' point was. And then this other part, this is from a prayer that he uttered that comprises most of John 17. And he speaks of himself in the third person, but he says, for you have given him, speaking of himself, authority over everyone. You give eternal life to each one you have given him. And this is the way to have eternal life, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, the one you sent to earth. Now, in this particular frame, eternal life, we're not talking about heaven here. This is a quality of life. This is back to that rich and satisfying life. So what is Jesus saying? He's saying, you want that rich and satisfying life, it comes from knowing God and walking with God. So you dovetail that with what we just heard from Bob Goff about choosing to follow God, choosing to be in relationship with God. And I think at times, especially if we're thinking about that, we do get afraid about making the wrong choice. And are we going to make the wrong choice and blow everything? And I think we've got some things to work out there. When I was in Princeton, Illinois, it was a small community about 100 miles outside of Chicago, where my first church was, first full-time gig. There was a moment 16 and a half years ago where I got a couple of phone calls that were going to challenge my faith. And my option there, I was in a great church, I was really thriving and doing some good stuff, but then I got this phone call from somebody in the Kansas City area that wanted me to consider starting a brand new church down there. And that had some pull to me. I thought, well, I could probably do that. I know Kansas City really well. I got a lot of family down there to support, and that could be a good thing. And then I got another call from this guy in California that wanted me to think about taking on a church here and doing what we call turnaround, which helps a church that's struggling and in a kind of a tough spot and help them come back to life in different ways. And so prayed about those things, and I really had 3 different options. And all of them were good. And all of them were God-honoring. I could stay right where I was and continue being a pastor right there, and that would be a good thing for God. I could go to Kansas City and start a whole new thing, and that kind of seemed like it was good. And I could come here, and that seemed like it could be good. So I was kind of confused, and I didn't want to blow it. I didn't want to make the wrong choice. And so I called a trusted colleague who'd been a pastor a lot longer than I was. He was nearing retirement, had a really successful tenure in different ministries. I called him up and I said, Gary, tell me what you think here. Here's what I'm faced with and sorting through. And he said a really good thing. He said, here's the deal. If your heart is pursuing God, and if things within you are saying go that direction, and you're honest about it, and you're looking at your gifts and your skills, and that one of those seems like a good fit, don't feel afraid to go for it, because even if you make the wrong choice, God is still going to go with you, because that's who God is. God is with you and for you. So you're really not going to blow it with these 3 options. Just pick the one that makes the most sense. Now that might mess with you a little bit, depending on your understanding of sovereignty and God's will and all that. There is a vein of theology that states that God has pretty much dictated everything that's going to happen from the beginning of time all the way to the end, meaning everything that you do has already been preordained, predestined to happen in a certain way. But that's just one vein of theology. There's actually a much bigger voice within the whole Bible that says, what we're seeing here is God that's in cooperation with humanity, and it's more of an ongoing experiment. And we certainly see that with the people of Israel, where Israel gets this sense of God saying, I'll be your God, you be my people. So this is what relationship looks like. And Israel does okay for a while, and then they blow it because they're human like us. And God comes along, he says, well, that didn't turn out so well. So let's try this thing again. Reset button, and I'll be your God, you be my people. This is what that looks like, so let's do it. And they do it again for a while, and it's fits and starts, just like us. But the point is that God is interested in that. He's interested in that ongoing relationship, because that's how we're going to experience the kind of life that Jesus has for us. So what I'm going to help you do in a few moments is to do some work on your own that I think if I just told you to do when you get home, my guess is, this is not scientific, but my guess is 5 of you would do it. Because we get really busy with our lives. Are the Niners playing today? Okay, so there you go. You're not going to do anything. I know the Giants are playing today, but, well, does it matter anymore? That's the disappointing thing. The miracles can happen, but, this would be a big one. So anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to give you time to process some stuff out. But first, just as a case in point, I've been talking about this character named Jacob for the past couple of weeks. And when we first started talking about him a couple of weeks ago, remember he was just coming back to meet Esau, the brother that he ticked off because he ripped him off so many years before. And he had the wrestling match with God. Remember we talked about that and got his name changed to Israel, which means struggles with God, not necessarily against God, but struggling together through the night, kind of sort things out. Then last week we were talking about God showing up and that sort of the idea we went with was that God's presence permeates all of creation, almost like a banquet for us, so that we're never far away from the presence of God. And so we looked at the story of Jacob, and he's running from his brother Esau because he just ripped him off, and he camps out on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, I-5 at Los Banos, nothing there, and yet he has this profound experience of God. And it made us wonder, well, gosh, if God could be in Los Banos, where else might God be? And I even put it out there that maybe even at the DMV, God could be found. However, Suzanne Smetzer emailed me this week, and she actually was at the DMV this past week here in Napa and let me know that, in fact, God was not at the DMV. So I stand corrected. But anyway, where this whole mess began in the conflict, just to give you a little backstory, so he got two twin brothers, and Esau, his name means hairy, not like Harry Belafonte, but hairy, hirsute, he looks like a gorilla, kind of hairy guy. And he made it out just a few minutes before Jacob. And so he was the firstborn technically, although not by much. And in ancient times, when it came time for the estate to be settled, in the worst case scenario, the oldest son would get everything and everybody else would be kind of on their own, and their hope would be that the oldest son would take care of them. But probably more likely, the oldest son was going to get twice as much as everybody else, so that the oldest son got a controlling interest in the estate, and really he was the one that was going to push the thing forward. So Esau knows this, Jacob knows this, and Jacob's mom Rebekah knows this. And they're seeing this thing play out. And as the boys grew up, they grew up to be very different men. Esau, they're both good, solid guys, but very, very different. Esau was a man's man, a rugged guy. Loved to hunt, loved to fish, loved to be out there. That's where he did his life. And he was great at it. And honestly, Isaac preferred him a little bit over Jacob. And I think probably the reason why is that he became kind of the man's man that I think Isaac kind of wanted to be but couldn't be, because of his own stuff going on that I think is tied into his father issues with Abraham. Because when your father tries to kill you, even if for a good reason, it has a way of jacking with your emotions. And I think it had a way of shutting down Isaac in some significant ways, which I think you can see traces of that in Scripture. So I think he looked at Esau and he was like, man, here's a guy I wish I was and couldn't be. And then you had Jacob, who was, still a son. Certainly he loves his son, but just totally different makeup. Jacob was more the book smart guy. He was the guy that understood organizational management. And they could see this going through the stages. Esau would be out doing his thing. Isaac would be there helping run the family business, a massive ranch by this point. And you can just hear the conversation between he and his mother, Rebekah, who loved both of her sons. But they're talking about the future as they both get a little bit older. And you can just hear him saying, man, I just don't know. I don't know if Esau's got the makeup, got the skill set to really make this thing happen. I can't see it. And we've got this grand vision that's our family story that Grandpa Abraham told us this amazing thing's going to happen, and Dad's been telling us the same thing, and we're looking at the future, and I think pretty sure Esau's going to run this thing into the ground. And so they started to wonder, Well, what if we switch that up? What if we could switch it around so that Jacob got the birthright? So Jacob tested the waters. Esau's out hunting one day. Jacob's back at the home, and he's cooking up some good lunch, some delicious stew. He was a pretty good cook. And Esau comes back and he's famished. He says, "Oh, that soup smells so good. Give me a bowl, man." And Jacob says, "How about this? I'll give you a bowl of this soup for your birthright, so that I will be the firstborn son." You're relinquishing what that means. And Esau, not quite so savvy, says, "Okay, you can have my birthright. Just give me the soup. It smells so good." And so that's kind of how he treated these things. And probably in the back of Esau's mind, he's thinking, there's no way this is going to hold up in court. He said this, I said that. Who would ever believe such a thing? But he did it. He was careless with it. And then later on, Isaac pulls his favorite son Esau close to his side. He says, "Hey, it's time for me to give you the blessing that you know's been coming. But before I do, could you go out and hunt me something great and bring it back and prepare it the way you know I like it? Maybe some venison or something, because that would just make this wonderful." And so Esau goes out with bow in hand. And he's going to go get this kill, and he knows when he comes back, he's going to prepare it, he's going to give it to Dad, Dad's going to give him the blessing, it's going to be a sealed deal, he's going to be wealthy, and it's going to be all good. Well, what he didn't know is that Mom was standing on the other side of the tent and heard the whole transaction go down. And she knew what was coming, so she hurried herself to Jacob and said, "Jacob, this is the time to move. We need to convince your dad that you are Esau, and you need to have him bless you so that you get the firstborn's blessing over your brother." Doesn't sound too good, does it? A little drama, pretty exciting book. And so Jacob, he's looking at himself and he says, I can hardly believe we're brothers, because I'm about as bald as you can get, and my brother is, he is as hairy as you can get. And Mom said, "Not to worry, just go put on some goat skin, just tape it to your arm, duct tape it, whatever, but make that goat stick to your arm, because that's about as hairy as his brother was." And so he's thinking, well, I guess that could work. But then he had another concern. He said, well, Dad's eyesight is really bad, so maybe the goat skin will work, but let's be honest, Esau has a personal hygiene problem. He smells most of the time like the great outdoors, which is not a compliment. And so his mom says, well, all right, well, you're right, so go roll around in the barn for a while so that you smell like your brother, and I'll make some tasty food, and we'll take it to your dad. So give it a shot. So Jacob goes in and says, "Hey, Dad, I'm here with your food and for the blessing." And Isaac's like, "Boy, that voice sounds way more like Jacob than it does my son Esau." So he says, "Come a little closer and let me touch your arm." So he touches the goat skin, and he says, "Yep, that's Esau, right?" And then he still wasn't quite sure, so he brought his arm up and gave him a whiff, and it smelled like a barnyard. And he said, "Well, the voice doesn't sound right, but the fur's right, and the smell's right, so it's got to be him." And then he tasted the food. It was delicious as he'd hoped, and then he lays hands on his son. He even says, "Are you my son Esau?" And Jacob says, "Yes, I am." And then Isaac blesses him, which is handing over the keys to the estate, essentially. So we have some serious deception happening, which is not criticized or judged by God, by the way. It's very interesting how this is happening. Well, you can imagine what happens. The blessing happens. Then Esau comes with his venison. He's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm here with the venison." And Isaac's like, "What happened?" Like this. And he figures out that he's been duped. And Esau's like, "Can't you just switch it around?" Because it was obviously deception. And back then, the way things worked, the word was the word, and it was done. It was taken care of. And so the blessing couldn't be that way. There are still things today in our day and age that are like that, where the word spoken has legal authority over something. Did you know that? I actually get to be part of that, because it's my word to have somebody get married that actually holds up in court. So even if the marriage document isn't signed, or even if it is signed but somebody contests that, before a judge, if the clergy says, I pronounce them husband and wife as the work of the state, that does it. So this kind of thing even happens today. So that just means I have a lot of power, and you should be really impressed. But back to the story. So now Esau's very upset. He realized what just happened. That was a lot of money that just went through his fingers, and he's out for blood. Now he's got a new animal to hunt, and it's his brother. And that's what causes him to go. So you think about this within the rubric that Goff is suggesting with that navigational idea of dead reckoning. So what's going on in Rebekah and Jacob's mind here to get this? Well, they're thinking, okay, we know what the dream of God is. We know what God is trying to do with our household. And we've been trying to work this thing out. It's not working out, and now we've got to do something drastic. And so they looked at Jacob's skill set. They thought about what that future could be, and they decided to dovetail those two things together. And you know what? When he slept at Los Banos that night, after he pulled this fast one, he didn't get slapped around by God. But God came to him and said, I'm still with you. And I'm going to do all the things that I said I was going to do through this family. I'm still with you. Now, does this mean we have a license to be dishonest and all that? No, but I want you to see that that was part of their rationale as they're thinking through, how are we going to pull this strategy off? So my question for you is, what are you doing with your life? Where are you going with your life? Because I think we were made for more than sucking air and watching TV. And I think there's more to life than just sitting around and not doing a lot. I think it might feel like we're surviving and might even be entertaining at times, but I don't think that's what we're made for. So the big question is, do you believe what Jesus is saying here, that there's a life to be had that God has in mind? He's shown us what it looks like in Jesus. And then Jesus himself is saying, if you want this kind of life, it comes through knowing God, which means you're in step with God. You're aligned with God. So my question is how aligned are you with God? If you're going to do some dead reckoning on your life right now about where you are and where you're going, what might that look like? And that's what I'm going to give you some time to do. So some of the phrases in this sheet, this whole where you're going sheet, I literally want you to take this out and scribble some notes. And to help you have a good, peaceful time doing that, I'm taking you to a place where a lot of people experience the peace of God, and that's the beach. So this beach is going to last about 10 minutes. It even has surf sounds on it. So if you can't stand this, or you're super fast, you get through it, then you can just watch the beach and drift away in your own world. And I'll be back with you to pray with you in just a bit. So let's roll the next slide with the video.